The Democratic Party, its progressive base, and even the White House have all been infected with a conspiracy notion in recent years. It is not nearly as self-destructive as the bogus belief that horse dewormer cures COVID that surged through the Republican ranks in the previous year. But it is very bad nonetheless. You can refer to it as greedflation. The idea behind this theory is that firms have become greedy and are working together in order to pad their profits, profiteer, and price gouge. This would explain why prices have increased by such a significant amount. Nobody has been able to come up with a definition of profiteering and price gouging that is more detailed than increasing prices more than I'd like to. For instance, a bill that was proposed on Thursday would prohibit price gouging, which the bill defines as pricing that is unconscionably exorbitant. You wonder what defines a price that is unconscionably expensive. To be determined, although it will most likely be against the law. The trouble with this story is that it's merely a negative tautology, and that's a big problem. Indeed, this is the case because businesses have chosen to increase their pricing. Okay, this is the economic equivalent of stating it's raining because water is falling from the sky, which is a common metaphor for precipitation. But why is that? Why are businesses that have historically been described as greedy, or, one could argue, profit maximizing, able to raise their prices at this time? What caused the drastic change that occurred between the beginning of the year 2020, when both corporate profits and inflation were falling, and the present day, when both metrics are unconscionably higher? The response is crucial because it will decide the actions that policymakers can or should take in response to the issue. The recent surge in inflation can be explained in the following way, according to economists. Demand is high as a result of forced savings brought on by the pandemic, as well as expansionary measures implemented by the government, stimulus payments, low interest rates, etc. In the meanwhile, supply continues to be limited as a result of outages connected to COVID, labor shortages, and other unlucky events. Whether it be oil, furniture, or eggs, businesses are unable to increase output at a fast enough rate to satisfy the demands of consumers for all of the products they want to purchase. At the end of 2022, there was a point where everything had to go right for there to be no recession. Not in the slightest. In hindsight, we see that we needed to have some good luck. As soon as the economy started to recover, consumer spending came roaring back with a vengeance. This was made possible by the months of mandatory savings and the expansive monetary and fiscal policy. Individuals competed against one another for homes, automobiles, sporting goods, even waffle irons. Because manufacturers and builders were unable to keep up with the demand, prices increased as a result. It was necessary for all of the pandemic-driven knots in supply chains to disentangle themselves for inflationary pressures to gradually decrease even in the absence of significant policy shifts or economic contraction. It was necessary for factories and other places of business to reopen, and employees had to go back to their regular places of employment. We needed there to be no unwelcome surprises at all. There must not be any unexpected shocks that could further pound vulnerable supply systems. There were no new catastrophes, whether they were caused by nature or by humans. There have been no further outbreaks, either in humans or animals. Instead, we had a string of bad luck, and many things didn't go as planned. Raising interest rates is the primary weapon in the Federal Reserve's arsenal for combating inflation. These things lower prices by reducing the overall demand. As a result of higher borrowing prices, purchasing a car or a house, for example, becomes more expensive, and as a result, eager clients draw back a little bit. The problem is that it is difficult for Fed policymakers to calibrate rate hikes in such a way that they are just sharp enough to reduce spending, but not so sharp that they cause the economy to collapse. When the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates in the past to bring inflation under control, the majority of those occasions have, inadvertently, caused the economy to enter a recession. This time around, Fed officials and outside economic experts, including myself, have believed that there was still a clear route for the Fed to achieve its prized soft landing, which is defined as cooling down the hot economy without destroying it. If supply chains were to largely return to normal within a reasonably short period of time after firms reopened, the Federal Reserve might delay hiking interest rates for some time and allow the economy to continue to expand at a rapid pace. This turned out to be a lot more optimistic than necessary. The supply chains continue to be a chaotic jumble. As a result of the Federal Reserve's inertia, the nation's central bank will need to implement more aggressive rate hikes in order to eventually succeed in stifling inflation. Because of this, the likelihood of a recession increases. In the meantime, other unexpected shocks are contributing to inflationary pressures, which the Fed will also have to deal with when it comes to monetary policy. Among these is the most recent round of COVID-related lockdowns, which accounts for factor No. 2 and has occurred in major manufacturing centers all around China. The Chinese government has shut down facilities and is preventing the export of important consumer goods including automobiles, electronics, and other critical items. This will lead to shortages and price spikes, which will in turn increase the pressures that are dragging inflation and the consumer's anticipation for greater inflation in the months to come. In addition to the immediate and incomprehensible lives lost and freedom in Ukraine, which has been caused by the war, huge disruptions in energy and food markets around the world have also resulted from the conflict. The United States and Europe, in particular, are feeling the direct effects of the dramatic increase in the price of oil and natural gas. The repercussions for the pricing of food are more widespread and have not yet been completely recognized to their full extent. Wheat and corn planting, harvesting, and transportation have all been hampered as a result of the conflict in Ukraine, which is renowned as the breadbasket of Europe. Sunflower oil, which is utilized in the preparation of numerous cooked and processed foods, is typically produced in approximately 60% of the world's total by the countries of Ukraine and Russia. As a measure to alleviate shortages, Indonesia has restricted exports of palm oil, which is another type of vegetable oil. In some British supermarkets, the sale of cooking oils has been restricted as a cost-cutting measure. Additionally, Russia is often a large supplier of fertilizer, which is utilized in the cultivation of crops in other countries such as Brazil. This trade has also been disrupted as a result of the war, which has led to an increase in the cost of agricultural production and, as a result, an increase in the prices of crops all over the world. In addition, the export limitations that China put into place the previous year led to an increase in the price of fertilizer even before the conflict began. Consumers are still eager to buy all of these products and services, despite the fact that Americans as a whole have an exceptionally high quantity of cash on hand. Therefore, they are willing to pay a higher price. Because of this, prices go increase. An illustration of this would be a car dealer in 2019 who increased their pricing by 10% and then watched as they lost clients and their inventory sat idle. In today's market, that dealer can increase prices by 20% and still have difficulties selling what they have in stock. This is due to the fact that there is still a limited supply of automobiles on the market, and consumers are ready, willing, and able to pay a higher price for any vehicle that does become available. The remedy to the general rise in prices is to either increase supply, by, for example, reducing obstacles to trade or encouraging oil drilling, or decrease demand by getting more people to participate in the labor force, removing trade barriers, or encouraging oil drilling. Raising interest rates. The economic theory of supply and demand is not the lens of choice for greedflationists when analyzing inflation. Some people believe that a mannequin fight between large corporations and their innocent victims, the customers, is what drives inflation. According to this line of reasoning, businesses are engaging in some sort of conspiracy to drive up inflation so that they may use it as an excuse to profiteer. It makes no difference that big business organizations have been very pessimistic about the outlook for inflation, given that unpredictable price growth can make it difficult for companies to prepare and increases the prospect of recession. So what kind of proof is there that corporations want there to be more inflation? The Greedflationists, a group that includes Vice President Joe Biden, have a problem with the fact that executives brag on earnings calls for their companies about how much money they are making. If you have never listened to an earnings call during which executives typically brag about how amazing revenues are or will be, you would think that this information is a smoking gun. However, this is not the case. The Greedflationists say that there is something fishy going on since businesses are not simply passing along their higher expenses, rather their profit margins are also expanding as a result of this trend. However, this is precisely what one would anticipate to occur when consumers have greater disposable income and are willing to pay any price in order to acquire the goods they desire. Both the prices and the earnings went up. This strategy has, at best, had no effect whatsoever on the rate of inflation. Worse, it has diverted Democrats from taking actions that could assist, because this greedflation narrative has persuaded both politicians and the public to misdiagnose the problem's origins. This has resulted in Democrats not taking actions that could help. Worst of all, it motivates Democrats to adopt policies that could end up being deliberately damaging to the country. One of these is a planned tax on windfall oil earnings, which would probably result in a reduction in oil production at the very time when we want production to expand, or a jubilee for the nation's collective school debt, which may boost consumer demand even further. The economy does not have to go into recession. The prognosis, though, is becoming more gloomy, first as a result of some poor choices, and then as a consequence of a string of really awful luck.